Right, let's take you to this now. Federation of Unions of South Africa is calling for a restructuring of the fuel levy to ease the burden on motorists. Fedusa's remarks come after fuel price increases were announced for August. Joining us for discussion is Riefdah Ajam, Fedusa General Secretary, as well as Layton, who's the AA spokesperson. A very good afternoon to you both. Thank you so much for your time. Perhaps let's start with Fedusa. As a trade union federation, you're essentially saying that the focus should be placed on the restructuring of the fuel levy to ease the burden on motorists and households. How do you propose for it to be done in terms of the breakdown of the total cost of the two main levies?
Good afternoon, Paul, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, indeed, this is a renewed call by Fedusa. We have made this call last year in March 2022, where the Minister of Finance had initially provided some respite from this process. But beyond that, it cannot be a continuation of lip service, because ultimately what we are seeing now is the government perpetuating poverty, government kicking workers down the road when already they have to be absorbing the high cost of basic services such as electricity in particular. This call for the restructuring of the fuel levy is extremely crucial. In his budget speech, the Minister of Finance had indicated that by doing this restructuring there would be major costs, and taking into account the two very pertinent aspects here now, the road accident fund and the general fuel levy, will be able to see massive costs. And at the end of the day, when you break it down in terms of rands and cents, government is in essence taking something like between 26 to 31% of the cost per tank of petrol. So what more does government expect from workers when they have absolutely no more disposable income at their expense right now? So it is simply something that government needs to do. We are in crisis. It is affecting workers, and at the same time, it is affecting employers.
Yeah. Layton, as we begin to measure the impact this is having on employers and workers and general South Africans, what's your proposal when it comes to the breakdown of the two costs of the two main levies? What should we be looking at there?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that we share Fedusa's concerns. When you look at the two main levies, they comprise around R6.13 on every litre of fuel. We don't normally go into a percentage of the fuel price, because the fuel price obviously adjusts every month, and so your percentage is going to change. But yeah, I mean, it's a very high proportion of a litre of fuel goes to taxes. Now, we for a long time have said that the general fuel levy, which is currently pegged at R3.95 a litre, is not something you can simply just take off a litre of fuel. The reason for that is that it's the fourth biggest tax that government collects. And while everybody would like to have that money taken off a litre of fuel, because it is such a big tax, government will simply find another way to collect that money, because it generates around 120 billion rand to the fiscus every year. Which is a lot of money. Government could raise taxes. They could increase the VAT rate. So that would be a concern of ours. When it comes to the levies, I think the big question is, how is the money that is being collected spent? And it's an issue of appropriation. It's an issue of graft and corruption. And that's where I think South Africans have got a problem. Many people would not have an issue paying that money if they saw something that was being given back in return. You know, roads that were working, education, healthcare, all of these types of things. So I think that there is a huge problem in terms of the money that's being collected and how it's actually being appropriated. Yeah. In terms of the road accident fund levy import, I think that for us is something that requires a lot of specific attention. The RAF is a poorly managed institution. It's badly run. It requires major intervention, and it's hemorrhaging money. For us, there is wiggle room in terms of dealing more effectively with that specific levy. But as Fedusa, the AA has for many years been calling for a review of the fuel price, for the review of the fuel price structure, and for civil society organizations such as ourselves and unions such as Fedusa to be involved in those discussions to find a way forward for a sustainable fuel price that actually is a win-win for all South Africans.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Riefdah, the Mineral Resources and Energy Minister, Gweda Mantashe, says that the reasons behind the increases may primarily be external factors like the price of crude oil and the rand-dollar exchange rate. Surely there's got to be ways around it. How should we begin to interpret this response? Does it mean that the government should simply step aside and leave citizens to take the blow?
You know, Per, that is $1 million question, and you are 100% correct. Government is literally sidestepping its responsibilities, and at this stage it cannot even begin to balance its responsibilities in terms of the social responsibility towards the poorest of the poor. We cannot keep on blaming external factors each time. Just take into account the 71% increase if you take into account the various grades now, but take into account illuminating paraffin, 71% increase. The homeless, the poor, the destitute are all reliant on that paraffin. Where do they even begin to find the money? But the main question at hand is Minister Mantashe should stop laying blame at someone else's door. In 2022 March, once again, when this discussion was equally attempting to push the price of fuel towards the 24 rand a litre mark, an interministerial task team was established. Fedusa had explicitly asked for that interministerial task team to be expanded and for that task team to be more inclusive, to cover the views not only of Labour as we are representing the workers out there, but to ensure that this task team comes to NEDLAC so that we could have the decent conversations and have an inclusive look at it to avoid the money, as Layton rightfully says, where's the money going to? How is this money being used? So government must stop paying lip service. Government must stop sidestepping its responsibilities and do right to what we believe should be a pro-poor approach in this regard, to help not only workers, to help employers, but at the same time to be able to kickstart this economy so that we can get this economy working. It is an excuse, and it is a poor excuse that we have heard over and over again. There are many other variables that we can be considering over and above the restructuring of the fuel levy, but simply just rubbishing your responsibilities is not something that we will take lightly.
Yeah, I mean, as you make mention of that time, it was around the same time that you asked government to intervene in the runaway fuel prices. In fact, if I remember, you'd set a deadline. How did that pan out?
Well, once again, nothing comes from this. We have a knee-jerk reaction, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, the poorest of the poor, the working class who are reliant on transportation costs to get them to their destinations, are failing miserably, and they are being left in abject poverty. It cannot be business as usual. And once again, we will stand side by side with organizations such as Layton that are bringing the empirical evidence in addition to what we have been providing to say enough is simply enough. Yeah. How much more do you want to trod onto our workers and those who simply don't even have enough? Once they begin to start make ends meet, you simply remove the ends. It cannot be right.
Yeah. Layton, insofar as research is concerned about the average financial standing of South Africans, the South African household, what can be made about the timing of this hike?
Look, I think we have to understand a few very important basics in this conversation. The first thing is that the fuel price is going to be adjusted every month in South Africa. That's how it works. Because we're buying fuel on an international market and we're paying for it in rands that need to be converted in dollars, the value of the rand against the US dollar is a key factor in determining the fuel price that we pay locally. And obviously international oil prices are something that we can't avoid. And that's something that every single country in the world has to pay. So, you've got to pay those prices. That's what the market is demanding. And we have no control over that. Where we do have control in terms of the markers, in a way, is the rand US dollar exchange rate. And I think that speaks to the point that I made earlier about how money is being appropriated. The value of the rand, yes, there are many international factors that are going to impact on that. But our local policies, our local politics, our local economy, our local strategies are all going to impact on the value of the South African rand against the US dollar. And I think that's a question that isn't spoken about enough in this conversation. And again, it's a question of where is the money being spent? Are we a credible economic state? And does that translate into a stronger value of our currency? And at the moment, we're seeing that that isn't. And I think that that's part of the problem. But South Africans are in battle. South Africans are struggling. We've seen rates hikes. We've seen these fuel hikes. The timing isn't suspicious in any way. It's something that's going to happen every month. It's going to happen in September and October and so on and so on. It's just wave after wave, unfortunately, for consumers. And it's not only motorists and petrol users who are going to suffer. Everybody suffers when especially the diesel price goes up because it's such a huge input cost in all sectors, retail, manufacturing, agriculture. And when those input costs go up, it's going to be translated into higher prices at the till. So we have to understand that. The point is we need a review of the fuel price for all South Africans. And we can't carry on with this discussion until that review has happened. And sadly, I have to agree with Riefdah. We hear murmurs about, yes, we're going to be inclusive, but unfortunately, very little comes from that.
Layton, you ask an important question. Where is the money spent? What if the response is that the money is spent and with it being spent, it will impact the funding of the general government expenditure programs?
Well, I think we have enough evidence to suggest that there is misappropriation of funds. I don't have to give you, point you very far. I mean, there are daily examples where money is being misspent and mismanaged, and we see it every day. And I think that is the concern of South Africans: is are we getting value for the money that we spend? And we must understand, when you put that liter of fuel in your tank, you are effectively contributing a tax to government, and you have a right to know where that tax is going. Now, the general fuel levy can be used for any purpose government sees fit. It doesn't have to be road or transport related. It can be for clinics. It can be to buy school books. It can be for whatever government decides. And that pot of money is, I think, where we are in the discussion. Is that pot of money being spent wisely? And for many South Africans who see on a daily basis that they're driving on roads that aren't properly maintained, and we see money being spent on state-owned entities, is that money being wisely spent? And I think for many South Africans, the answer to that question is going to be no. We don't benefit from it personally.
And Riefdah, just in closing, I mean, you say that this is a renewed call that you're making again this year. How are you hoping to elevate the conversation and elevate the discussion so that we see some sort of action or response at least?
Unfortunately, the power of the people will speak. The power of labor and the power of the absolute desperation out there will speak. We are now feverishly running towards an election year, but ultimately, as promises beyond promises are made, it's just empty promises. So we will most certainly be elevating this matter within the NEDLAC chambers. We will most certainly be writing back to the president to ask for his direct intervention, because the task team is reporting to the president. So at the end of the day, we cannot be ignoring what is happening in South Africa. As Layton rightfully says, the knock-on effect throughout the economics is what is being fed and felt here at the end of the day. So most certainly we will keep you abreast of developments, and we thank you for the opportunity, but we definitely will be advancing this matter to make sure that justice can be served. At the end of the day, we simply cannot continue to accept what is being extended towards us, whether it's external factors or internal factors, but at the end of the day, something is going to give if specific action is not going to be taken by the South African government. We only have to look towards what happened just a year and a half ago, and we certainly don't want a version 2 or round 2 of that particular desperation when there's lack of service delivery, and the knock-on effect has an impact on the volatility of the rand to which we are procuring. So most certainly we will be pressing all the necessary buttons and executing not just the use of an extinguisher, but blazing it on all fronts, because most certainly our members are losing their jobs as a result of the knock-on effect. So please do watch the space. We are most certainly going to be putting on the pressure.
Very well. Thank you so much. Let me thank you both. A reality check there. Riefdah Ajam, Fedusa General Secretary, as well as Layton, AA spokesperson. Thank you for your time.